Splinterlands is my favorite Web3 game, but recently there's been some sentiment inside of the community that the game is on death's door and will disappear in the next year. Today we'll break down 7 reasons why the game is dying and my thoughts, as well as 7 reasons why it isn't, so you can come up with your own educated opinion. So first up on the list of why Splinterlands is dying is the reason I made this video. The fact that Soulbound reward cards don't really seem to be stopping bots from taking advantage of the ecosystem. Now, I never really understood why we needed to make this change in the first place. I mean, personally, I thought that reward cards were fine the way they've been working for the last 3 years and that there wasn't really an issue. However, some users felt that making the reward cards that you gain from playing the game account bound would stop the waves of bots that are there to extract value from the system by competing in games for the limited pool of rewards and then selling them on the open market. Tales from the Cryptmancer, another YouTuber that covers primarily Splinterlands, made essentially a rant video on how he thinks that Soulbound reward cards are going to destroy the economy in game, and that this is essentially the death knell for Splinterlands. Personally, I just disagree with this thesis in general. I don't see a huge difference between the Soulbound reward cards that we have now and the old system for reward cards that we had for the past 3 years. While you can certainly make the argument that more bots will pop up and then farm out all of these Soulbound reward cards in bronze, thereby making the accounts essentially stronger in order to compete in the higher levels over time, you could make that argument with the regular reward system as well. And so to me, nothing has changed. Essentially what we've done is we've incentivized them to not sell the reward cards on the open market, but eventually these cards will be tradable anyway. And to me, that really hasn't changed anything for the outlook of the ecosystem. If you didn't like bots before, you're not going to like them now. They've essentially circumvented the reason that these Soulbound reward cards were put in place in the first place. And to me, that just really limits player choice. I don't really like this change in general. I didn't understand why it was put into place, and it clearly, according to the community at least, is having some backfiring. And so that's something that maybe we need to address down the road. For now, we're just going to have to deal with the ramifications of this decision. The second reason that Splinterlands might be dying is because of the trust loss from DEC being in the SPS airdrop. Now, this may have occurred before you had joined up in the game. This was a thing right when I joined up in the game a couple of years ago. Essentially, the team had just messed up and miscalculated how much of a part that DEC and holding it would give to the SPS airdrop when they had announced that. And so what most people did was they bought up as much DEC as they could in order to get as many airdrop points as possible and accrue this free SPS that was being given out on a daily basis. And what that did was drive up the price of DEC exponentially. I mean, it went all the way from $1 per thousand to $12 per thousand. And a lot of people didn't really understand the mechanics of why this was happening. And I think some of these people got hurt in that process because now DEC is at about 60 cents per thousand and has been there for quite some time. And while the team is trying to get it back to peg at $1 per thousand, it will never probably approach that $12 per thousand limit again. And so you've essentially lost, if you bought the top, almost 90% of the value of what you had actually spent into it. That kind of loss is tough for anyone. And I get that you could have researched it and tried to figure out, why that price spike was happening. And some people probably did. I know Infidel1258 was putting out videos about why this was a bad call. And so the community was definitely, crying out like, hey, be aware of this, that this is not a phenomenon that will last forever. This is a temporary thing that was caused by a mistake. That being said, you can't just rely on the community to be the crier for your game. And really the devs should have put out some more information around why this was occurring and spread it around to people so that they weren't hurt by this on accident. I don't think that for a Web3 game to function, you should have to be on Discord in order to get these kind of information pings. You shouldn't even have to really get emails. It should be laid out for you inside the game in some kind of in-game newsletter whenever you log in, so that way you can get up to speed. You shouldn't have to be eyeing YouTube or Discord in order to get up-to-date information that might affect your financial well-being. And so I think that lost some trust in the ecosystem for a lot of people. And as we've seen DEC kind of stagnate as well as SPS price, that just reinforces that, the Splinterlands team must be messing up because they have messed up this thing in the past that caused people to lose money, and now the prices of both their coins are tanked. And so that sentiment is kind of self-fulfilling and reinforcing. The next reason why Splinterlands is dying is to me the most important. This one is the reason why I think we're having a hard time getting new players to come into the ecosystem and why so many people are frustrated that Land hasn't come out yet. It's the simple gameplay of Splinterlands. The game itself is not exactly very attractive to most players outside of the realm of heavily dedicated player base that Splinterlands already has. It's very difficult for me to get my friends to actually jump in and play the game because they take a look at the graphics, they take a look at the gameplay, and they're not interested. I mean, personally, I really love the gameplay and it does appeal to me. But that being said, even I could see that it would benefit from some extra gameplay layers and some more flashy things to attract new people and keep the people who are there entertained. Because at the end of the day, I mean, you can't just have a game that only bots are playing, right? It needs to appeal to players too. And I think Splinterlands does, but it could definitely use some extra love. And that's what Land was supposed to do. Land was supposed to bring a new gameplay layer where you would put down potions at the start of a match in order to kind of change the outcome of the match. And that strategy in and of itself would have added a lot more depth to the actual gameplay than we currently have. And personally, I don't really care that the art assets are really simple and that the backgrounds are simple. I mean, it's a web game. They could definitely do more with it. But as far as like the quality, I've definitely seen an improvement in their quality standards and their art direction. And a lot of the things that they're putting out, especially for the Rebellion teasers, look very enticing. And so I think that they've got that down. What they really need, in my opinion, is some more gameplay loops and just some extra strategic depth, because realistically, the only strategic depth that this game has right now is your card choices and what you're going against with different rule sets. And they do that very well. But I think it just needs an extra layer, a little bit extra spice to kind of entice new players to play the game more. And so that leads into my next point, which is that Land updates are still not here and won't be for some time. When I entered the game in July of 2021, Land was already a thing and people had already bought up all the land that existed in the pre-sale. And so I couldn't really get into Land except on the secondary market where it was exorbitantly priced. And I think that that influenced a lot of people's perception of what Land would provide them, and that like ridiculous amount of player growth that the game had experienced in that early days of 2021 kind of really showed that, oh, maybe this land is worth $1,000 a plot, or maybe this land is worth, $200 a plot. We really don't know where to price it even still. That put a lot of expectations on Land. And the devs had promised that Land would essentially rework the game, that there would be all these extra layers of complexity. And it's been 2 years and we still haven't seen it. So I think that a lot of people are getting a little fed up. And there has been some progress with Land recently. Now we have the ability to actually view our land in game. At least the plot names, we can see kind of where we're at on the map, essentially. And they've done improvements to the other market that allows you to sell your land and actually trade it back and forth between players. And so that's helpful. But we have none of those gameplay elements that they had talked about. And we still can't even view what our land contains. Like if our land is more rare than other land, we have no clue yet. And so that's going to be coming soon. But the actual gameplay component of Land is quite a ways off yet, maybe even another year. And I think that's just unacceptable for a lot of players that have been kind of waiting on this in order to spice up the gameplay loop a little bit, or, kind of create some extra intrigue around the game so that maybe we get some new players in the ecosystem, or, it pulls us out of this bear market is what I think a lot of folks are waiting for. And so not having Land really hurts. I mean, 2 years, a lot of that they were dealing with, the rampant growth that they were experiencing in 2021. They had to really scale up their servers. They added like 60 employees, which we now know was too many for this coming environment that we see ourselves in. And so I think that they had a lot on their plate. They were way underprepared for the kind of growth that they were experiencing, and that set back their timelines. However, us as players, we don't really see a whole lot of that behind the scenes stuff. And so our expectations were that they would be able to deliver on the timelines that they had originally announced. And thus far, that has not been the case. And they've had to push this back for quite some time. I think that once Land does come out, there are going to be some people who are disappointed in what it does provide them, and that might even see a bigger exodus of players from the game. I hope that that's not the case, and that hopefully Land fixes a lot of these issues for us. But for now, it's still not out and won't be for some time, and so that's a big con. The next reason why Splinterlands is dying is because they brought out SPS Staking without any actual use cases. This caused a whole bunch of inflation on the SPS governance token that that may or may not have been necessary. There's not any sinks for SPS right now that could really take away some of the SPS supply. We're just starting to see the introduction of that with the burning of SPS in order to get DEC. Once DEC kind of starts to rise in price, then we might actually see some downward pressure on SPS. But for the time being, I mean, SPS's inflation has been running rampant, and it's caused a lot of price depreciation that has turned some investors off of the ecosystem. And so I think that while initially, when things were going very well, obviously the SPS airdrop was a big way to get players into the game because they saw these massive APYs and they wanted to partake in that. However, now it's really bit us in the butt in that we haven't gotten any of these sinks that we were supposed to have in order to kind of make SPS worthwhile. Now, I do appreciate that they took the route of adding governance to the game because that is something unique to the Splinterlands ecosystem that SPS provides. But allowing us to kind of have a say in what the developers are thinking doesn't really help all that much when, you know, it's only so many players that have most of the SPS. There's only so many development resources that can work on these proposals. And I think we've got some other problems to figure out before SPS really has its like full utility that we've talked about. Validator nodes would be one, the actual validation network, because the nodes exist, but again, we still don't have the validator network that is supposed to, you know, provide this use case for the SPS in the ecosystem and allow us to decentralize it in some way, as well as player staking, which is supposedly coming soon, but we really don't have a date for that or anything yet. And so that could get delayed as, you know, land takes priority, or player staking might not even be the solution that we think it is. Another economy-related reason for why Splinterlands may be dying is that there are no voucher sinks and there is a ton of voucher inflation. These vouchers were intended to reward players who had been in the game for a while and really wanted to participate in the Chaos Legion presale. And so this kind of gated them. This gave them tickets essentially to participate, and these tickets were very expensive. I remember spending a ton of money on vouchers in order to get into the Chaos Legion presale. Now these vouchers are essentially worthless because they've been printing 40,000 of them a day for the last year. While they have had some things that use vouchers, like for example the Rift Watchers presale, and they've had some of the utility that vouchers were purported to give in the game thus far, there just hasn't been enough voucher sinks. And we did get the DEC battery sale recently, which if you're not familiar, essentially that was a way for them to kind of take DEC and vouchers out of the ecosystem by providing bonds that would then give you a 20% discount on certain things that you could use with batteries. And while that has been successful in reducing the voucher supply and the DEC supply by somewhat, the inflation problem has not been solved, and there still needs to be more sinks for vouchers in the future. The final reason that Splinterlands may be dying is that bots can participate in tournaments and guild battles. I think that this is a problem. I think most of the community believes that this is a problem. I don't see why they should be able to participate in something like a tournament where it's intensely skill-based, and a lot of times bots can make better decisions than players, or you know, even just get a whole bunch of rewards that are intended for participation, but you didn't actually participate, you know, you just had a bot do everything for you. And so I think that that takes away from the competitive spirit of tournaments and guilds where you are intended to be participating in order to earn these rewards. And it's really kind of the end game for Splinterlands. You're trying to be the best. And if you have a bot that is partaking in a tournament, that kind of cheapens the wins of it. I think that they should just disable the battle APIs for the tournaments and guilds, and that would solve this problem pretty quickly. It would mean that we'd have to have a different way of getting metrics, or maybe Splinterlands themselves provide the metrics, which I think would be perfectly acceptable if these are read-only APIs instead of write. And then we could get a way to still figure out tournament results and what kind of battles happened and things like that, but you couldn't actually submit a team through the API. That would make it so that, you know, bots can't actually participate in that ecosystem of guilds and tournaments. And I think that would just be better for the actual validity of these events, because personally, I don't really care about bots in the main formats of the game, like Modern or Wild. I think that that is acceptable, and that is the stance that the team has taken, and so I'm not going to fight them on that. If that's what they want to do with the game, then that's okay, and the community, you know, has mixed opinions about that, and maybe that's a topic for a bigger video. But I do think that, especially in something that is intended to be hyper competitive like a tournament, we really shouldn't have bots participating in that. And with that, those are the 7 reasons why Splinterlands may be dying. So now let's get into some cheerier stuff and talk about why I think Splinterlands is succeeding on a lot of levels. So the first reason I think that Splinterlands is really succeeding right now is that they actually have a growth plan moving forward with Nifty Arcade. So they've decided to give out 500,000 Chaos Legion packs from our reserve that were probably going to get burned anyway, and give them to Nifty Arcade as starter packs for players that might be interested in trying out the game. I think this is a really bold move and a smart strategy because the gameplay that is in Splinterlands I think is really good, and if we can expose more players to that gameplay and like actually give them a risk-free way to try out the game at a higher level where it's more exciting, giving players a risk-free way to participate I think is a no-brainer, and it's a nice growth strategy that I think Splinterlands really needs right now. I think that was a really smart decision by them. I know that it ticked off some members of the community who are like, but my asset growth. And I can relate to that. I understand. I participated in the Chaos Legion presale. I mean, there's definitely some aspects of the Chaos Legion set that I wish were performing a little bit better, right? And so maybe if those packs were burned, our asset prices would rise a little bit. But I think that's very short term. And realistically, we should be looking at the longevity and the health of this game if we want our asset prices to actually appreciate. I think introducing this game to more people is the right thing to do, and this is a great way to go about it. Following that, I think that Splinterlands has the absolute most dedicated community in Web3 gaming. If you can think of a more dedicated community in Web3 gaming, leave a comment below because I'm interested. But I have never seen so many people care deeply about the success and the prosperity of a game or a company like Splinterlands in Web 2 or Web 3. I mean, they are some of the most dedicated people that I've ever had the pleasure to interact with. There are dozens of YouTube channels that put out content every single day on this game and put out their thoughts and strategies and opinions, and a core group of players that are super interested in this game and its growth. And I think that will be a really big reason why Splinterlands could succeed in the future, because having that core dedicated player base is something that games all over struggle to accomplish, and Splinterlands has done that by providing a lot of freedom, a lot of ability for players to actually influence the path of the game and have a say through governance, and just really some unprecedented things for the gaming space that I think are revolutionary. Splinterlands has a lot of systems that other games, I would have wished that we had in other games, but they're the first to do it. And for that, they've attracted a really diehard fan base of people that know that this is the future and want to be here. And that is a really powerful thing as far as like influence goes, and just having, the ability to make sure that you're not going to go bankrupt because you can always sell products to these individuals who really care about your game. And that leads into my third point on why Splinterlands is succeeding, and it's because if they're going bankrupt, they're really not showing it. Now, I think a lot of people were scared about this because they laid off 60 employees and made an announcement that most of their reserves are in crypto, and if prices kept falling, they may actually have to take some drastic measures or even go bankrupt. And I think that a lot of that has alleviated for the most part. We haven't really seen a fall in crypto prices nominally. In fact, they've recovered a little bit recently, and so hopefully they've been able to take advantage of some of that, transfer some of these funds into runway for the project in order to continue development. But it's important to keep in mind that employees are by far the biggest expense that a business has, and just cutting 60 employees, I mean, that saves them so much money on a year-by-year basis. Even with, the loss of runway that they've had from crypto prices falling, 80% roughly on average, they still really have a lot of savings just by laying off those employees, and it sucks for those employees. I really empathize with that because they got to be a part of this awesome project, and now they don't. But you have to look at it from a business perspective, and if they are costing the business, on average, let's say I'm making $80,000 a year working for Splinterlands, you got to tack on an extra 50 to 60% of that salary that the business actually has to pay for things like 401k, insurance, and, all sorts of benefits and things like that they're providing to their employees, as well as like sick days and holidays and things like that. So even if I'm averaging, like paying my employees 80 grand, I mean, you're talking about 60 employees times $150,000. That's a ton of money. And so I think that while it originally looked like a really bad deal, I'm personally happy that they made that decision because it buys them a lot of time in order to actually get this game to the state that they're comfortable with and try to market it to more people. I would be much more concerned if they were still trying to have that 100-person company and they had so few reserves. I mean, that would really scare me. So I think that they won't be going bankrupt anytime soon. And I think that's also because they have such a core dedicated fan base that they can sell products to. With Rebellion coming out rumored to be sometime in Q2, maybe early Q3 at the latest, they've definitely got enough runway till then. And hopefully then they can sell enough of these packs to our core fan base that, they can extend their runway for at least another year, if not more, through those sales. And so personally, I'm not really worried about this. I know that some people definitely are concerned about this and have sold some assets in order to kind of hedge their bets, but that's just not something I'm concerned about right now. I think there are other bigger concerns than their company itself going bankrupt. Which leads into my fourth point, that they are constantly upping the quality of the game. I think that because they've kind of honed in on this core group of 40 employees, they've really been able to, kind of batten down on their quality control for the art assets. Like the stuff that they're putting out for Rebellion has like a really good style, and I think it looks thematically very good. I think it might even attract players that were turned off by the looks of Splinterlands, just because they're pretty cool. I mean, I would be really interested in hanging up some of them on my wall as like art prints. Like, I think that that's really important, and it lets the fans kind of participate in, having something that they are really attached to because it looks cool. I mean, it sounds stupid, but that's a really big part of games, and what draws people to them is the style of them. And so them upping the quality of the game in lots of ways, more than just art, like gameplay, and we're seeing the new rule set expansion with 3 rules. I mean, that adds a lot to the game that you wouldn't have otherwise thought it would. They're continuously upping the quality. It is maybe slower progress than people were anticipating, but at least the effort is there to constantly improve, and I think that that is super important moving forward. I mean, by the time that we get out of whatever bear market that we're in, I mean, maybe the game's on a whole new level, and that allows us to be better prepared for the next bull run. The next point I want to make is that they've refocused on actually adding new elements to the gameplay. They've heard the community complaints that, the game is too simple and that they want land that they were promised, years ago. And so that for me is really good. Even if it's not at the pace that we were hoping for, I mean, at least they're still working on it. And what we've seen so far has been promising, because in my opinion, that's one of the bigger things holding the game back. And if we can get some better gameplay that appeals to more people and has some more nuance and strategic depth, I mean, then we could really start to see bigger strategy channels evolve, because right now, really the main strategy part of Splinterlands is the card market and like what cards you're going to buy, and how that your deck actually plays with the rules that are given to you for each battle, and that is the strategic layer. There's not much more to it than that. Now, you could talk a little bit about placement of your cards and where you actually want to set up and how they interact with each other, but that's more of a tactics thing than it is a strategy thing. And I think adding a strategic level like potions that you can then create in order to give different variances to your actual core gameplay loop, that to me solves a lot of problems that the Splinterlands gameplay has, and will make it much more attractive to players of games like Hearthstone or Marvel Snap, which are not direct competitors by any stretch. I mean, the Splinterlands team is much smaller, but they have comparable gameplay loops. And so I think that kind of broadening the gameplay here a little bit through the additions that they're trying to make will be a huge net positive for Splinterlands. The sixth reason why Splinterlands is succeeding right now is that the community can guide the game. And I think this is super underrated as far as a pro. I mean, I've yet to see a game that has the kind of control and granularity that the community proposals have in Splinterlands, and it's working really well. I mean, it seems that, the community, even though we're a little disgruntled and disjointed, is able to really come together on these proposals and vet them in a way that isn't really harming the game and taking up too much development time. They're really trying to put their best foot forward here and make a game that everyone can be proud of. And that leads back into, us having the most dedicated Web3 gaming community in Splinterlands. These people are really thoughtful and really care about the game. And I think that the decision to give some of the control to the community and make them even more invested is so smart. As far as engagement goes, you're never going to lose that core base of players if you keep giving them the reins and giving them a say and a stake in this game development. And so even if these community proposals aren't super impactful right now, I mean, think about the long term, like the next 5 years, and what giving a player base the ability to kind of shape the direction and trajectory of a game for 5 years does. I think you'd be really surprised at the impact that this is going to have on Splinterlands and how many players it draws in, and its ability to provide things that no other game really can right now. For the final point in why Splinterlands is succeeding right now, I think is really simple, but super important. And it's that I still enjoy playing Splinterlands 2 years into a Web3 game. There's no other Web3 game that I can think of that I still enjoy playing. And I think that's a big reason why most of them have failed thus far, is that the gameplay itself isn't very exciting. You're kind of just there for gaming the economy and trying to make as much money as possible off of other suckers. And I don't think that that's a really good long-term model for success. Splinterlands being attractive and enticing and still enjoyable to me 2 years in, I think says a lot about the longevity of the game and will, factor into a lot of people's decisions on whether or not they stay or go. In the end, a lot of investing and speculating is emotion based. And if you can give players a reason to stick around, they will. And if it's just, I like this game, that's easy enough. That makes a difference in my mind. That makes a difference in most people's minds that are still here playing the game. And this kind of stickiness that they've provided for their core fan base, I think really plays into it. But they've also just created a game that is exciting and enjoyable. Whenever I try to make a decision about anything, I always try to look at it from both angles. I think that it's really important to understand the counter argument, because once you understand why something isn't good, then you can understand why it is good, right? It helps put more nuance on the argument overall. And I think it's very difficult to classify things in black and white. Like, it's always somewhere in the middle. And so Splinterlands may or may not be dying, and that's up for you to decide. It's a personal decision as to whether or not you want to continue playing this game and investing in it. I personally will be. This hasn't changed my opinion very much. However, I think it's important to consider these different aspects that the community is bringing up, because they do have some valid points, and it would be foolish of me to overlook that because of my own convictions. And for that reason, I implore you to check out this video on screen now, where I go over how Splinterlands is revolutionary in its technology, because if you haven't seen it before, it might very well change your opinion on the state of the game and what it can offer you. So I hope you enjoyed this video and learned something. And with that, thanks. I'll catch you in the next one.